When we were first asked to learn about MSA, there was nobody else that I knew of that was offering any kind of mathematics professional development for teachers. There were companies forming or vendors that were becoming known who could talk about the Common Core State Standards as a document. But that's not what I was looking for, because I had already been in my teachers' classrooms at all 9 schools in my district. And my background is stronger in reading instruction because I'm a high school English language arts teacher. But I had already announced to my staff, it's like, math is the area we need to grow into, and I'm going to grow right along with you. So the email, I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for, you know? And so I went to the initial meeting, and they started describing what MSA was, and the tight focus on mathematics content, because I didn't know where else to get it. You know, nobody was coming forward from all of the consultants or contractors that I'd previously worked with that says, when your teachers struggle to teach math, we can help improve that knowledge base. So in the initial meeting, that's when I committed my schools who were eligible. I was like, we're joining. I mean, even if the principals aren't present and their coaches aren't here, I don't care. They will join, and I'm going to support them through that endeavor. But it was being in the classrooms, kind of like Lorenzo did at other schools, and watching mathematics instruction and going, this is really just procedures. It's the algorithm. It's 2 + 2 = 4, and there's no other way to do it. And there was no discussion about why that is. And that's one of the key points for me when I think about the growth that teachers have gone through because of either the Summer Institute or the Irrational Numbers Institute, is they really have to start explaining the math. Not just get the correct answer, but explain it. And I think one of the future areas that we'll grow into is being able to identify when students make a mistake and being able to explain why that mistake caused the result, so that then they can flip it around and then reteach the concept. I think it's important for my staff to see that I didn't just commit them to something that I'm not willing to do myself. And I readily admit to them, you know, I'm not as strong as I am in reading as opposed to math. You know, I was a good math student in high school because my teachers could teach me the procedural way of doing things. But if I had to teach an elementary or middle school math class right now, I probably only have one way of teaching, the same way that I learned. And I feel it's important for my principals and my teachers to see that their district superintendent, their education line officer, is here learning right along with them. You know, I do the problems, sometimes I engage in the groups, sometimes I'll wander around and see how they're working on the math too. But for teachers, it's important for them to see their administrator present. And it gives them the encouragement to continue working. It honors the time that they're committing away from their lives to be on a Saturday or during the summer. And it also gives me a clue and the opportunity to speak in depth with either Lorenzo or Rick to ask questions to further my learning. But it prepares me for going back into the classroom so that I can recognize when they say, well, I learned this at an MSA day or the Irrational Number Institute or sometime during the summer. And I can have that same connection, and it's not that vague administrator understanding of, oh yeah, well it looks good, but I actually am starting to understand what they're doing. The immediate next is a way to expand and extend, because interacting with our teachers, we're a year and a half in. We have a half a year before we start year 3, and the agreement is for 3 years. And I have a sneaking feeling that 3 years is not going to be enough time or practice or coaching and support for some of our teachers. And some may be generous, I could probably say most, because the history of elementary math education, because the history of the scores or the data that we could look at even before we started MSA, because of the almost long process that's taken to get to this point. You know, we're a year and a half into the 3-year cycle, and we're just now starting to see some transference to the classroom. Or we're just now starting to see a shift in confidence, or a willingness to take the practices to the students, a willingness to implement things that are very scary, new, and foreign, and struggle with it in the classroom with students and bring work back and says, I did it and these are the results. I mean, that's a year and a half worth of work. It probably says a lot about our teachers' preparation for this, because many of them went into MSA blind. We did the best we could to describe what the expectations were, what the content would be, what the process was, but I don't think they truly understood what their level of math preparedness was coming into MSA. What level of math skill did they have before we started the training? And there may have been a big discrepancy between what they thought they had and what they actually did have. And I think we often see that struggle on the Irrational Number Institute days. Data is larger than any of the math progress monitoring tools that we have. And I frequently have to remind my principals, it's more than test scores. And when you're working in a school and a change environment or school improvement effort, everything can become data. So one of the most important points I'm looking at right now is how our teachers collaborate, how they work with the coaches from MSA, how they work with their grade level peers, how they work with the on-campus coaches, and how they work with the leadership of their principal. That data for me is more important than the immediate test score data, because we could look at each individual school, each individual grade, and you'll see peaks and valleys of growth. And that's just one snapshot in time. But if we're more focused on changing a teacher's practice, then it is rooted in the habits and the behaviors they engage in or the things that they model and exhibit. It's their professional practice grows. And for me, that is the ultimate outcome for MSA, is to change our teachers' habits, change the way they think about math, change their own identity, and how they think of themselves as a teacher, where they're not just an elementary teacher and I'm good at reading and I hate math. Because I want all of my schools in my district to start moving more towards math and science focused. That is the direction and path of the future, and we have to get ready. You know, I have set up a goal with one of my schools where we will eventually teach Algebra 1 in 8th grade. We've got about 2 more years to meet that goal. The principal's very willing and ready to take that on, understands the gap that currently exists in student performance and teacher ability, but it's a realistic goal for him. He's like, we can do this because that's an essential level of preparation that our students need, because the schools that participate right now either end at 6th grade or 8th grade, and they frequently leave the Bureau of Indian Education system and join a public school for high school. So we need them to be very prepared, because there's a big difference in the level of support they may experience once they leave our system, and the level of concern as a student and as a person that they may experience when they leave our system. And I think as we continue to build our teachers' confidence with instructing math, confidence with really struggling to understand what did this student do that helped them get the right answer to increase their understanding, or what did they do that created this wrong answer, and how do we understand it? What is it that I need to go back and fix? I would much prefer that all of my teachers were mathematicians and scientists, because I think it's a culmination kind of skill. You know, reading, not to say that it's any less important, but as a system we have spent years focused on reading. And unfortunately, during those years, we did not focus highly on math. And if we did, we only plucked 2 or 3 teachers so that they could become the mathematicians. But it didn't represent all grades.
That's right.
So we have this giant math gap, and math is a gateway to science. So if we're ever going to get to science and get that strongly into our curriculum, we have to focus here now. And it's eventually going to change our schools, but it's going to take a long time. It's not an overnight thing. And I think the data will come along, because the data is a reflection of the student's effort and the teacher's work. I think MSA has done a really good job of explaining math as a continuum, and we've allowed teachers to really segment their knowledge base based on their grade level assignment. And if we continue down that path, when the teacher changes grades by choice or by force, it destroys their world because they've always been the sixth grade math teacher. Now you want them to teach third or fourth grade.
Right.
And 20 years of practice, and I've never taught third or fourth grade math. But when you think of it conceptually and as a long continuum of learning, yes, you have. And that is linked back to their self-image, their identity, their confidence around math, to be able to take the skills that they're very good at and begin learning things that they're not good at, or to increase their overall knowledge of math. Up against some of the deeply held beliefs of teachers where they have to teach the textbook from page 1 to page 350 in 9 months. And that perspective really never allowed them to come here, where they're thinking about the math and challenging their own understanding and the representation of the numbers. And that's where I see some teachers starting to pull ahead of the pack or stay behind because they're fighting with the Common Core state standards and the math being so complex. Now, where is it in the textbook?
Yeah.
And I have to teach the textbook, and we're saying, no, there are actually some standards that are more important than others because they lead to deeper understanding or the next level of learning. So you may not teach every single page, but they don't yet have the skills to discern which pages not to teach.